Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, August 29, 2025. It's the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina devastating Louisiana, Mississippi, and other parts of the Gulf Coast. Tributes today to those lost, pride in the rebuilding and recovery, and thoughts of preparing for future storms. President Donald Trump says he will cut $4.9 billion for foreign aid through something called a pocket rescission, which will not give Congress a chance to vote on it. Some members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, say that's illegal and unconstitutional. Transportation Department cuts nearly $700 million in contracts for 12 wind energy farms, calling those projects wasteful. New tariffs on once-exempt small value packages have taken effect. We'll talk with New York Times business reporter Peter Eavis about what this means for you the next time you order something shipped from outside the U.S. United Nations Security Council holds a meeting on Russia's continued deadly bombardment of Ukrainian cities, including the capital, Kyiv. And former U.S. Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham has died. He was a war hero and Navy ace fighter pilot who went to prison after pleading guilty to taking bribes from defense contractors. Associated Press reporting from New Orleans 20 years after Hurricane Katrina devastated the U.S. Gulf Coast with catastrophic storm surge and flooding. New Orleans marked the storm's anniversary Friday with solemn memorials, uplifting music, and a parade that honored the dead, the displaced, and determined survivors who endured and rebuilt. Some of Louisiana's congressional delegation posting videos on this anniversary. Democratic Congressman Troy Carter's district includes most of New Orleans.
It has now been 20 years since Hurricane Katrina devastated our communities. 20 years since lives were lost, homes destroyed, and families displaced. But it was also a turning point, a moment that forever changed the culture, the priorities, and the resilience of Louisiana. We lost family, we lost friends, we lost ways of life, but we're resilient and we'll never quit. Hurricane Katrina isn't just history, it's personal. We carry the memory with us every single day. And while we remember the pain and the loss, we also draw strength from the courage of the survivors who built their lives and our communities against all odds. They rebuilt things that some said couldn't be rebuilt, some that thought it shouldn't be rebuilt. Their determination inspires us to keep building safer, stronger, and more equitable communities. As storms grow more intense and last longer, our commitment to preparedness and recovery must grow stronger too. That means sound policy, smart investments, and science, not politics, guiding our decisions. As a founding member and co-chair of the Bipartisan Disaster Preparedness and Recovery Caucus, I've made it my mission in Congress to champion these priorities. We're working to advance legislation that strengthens disaster readiness, delivers timely and equitable relief to survivors, and ensure communities can recover fully and swiftly. Preparedness isn't a partisan issue, it's a moral one. So when we reflect on 20 years since Katrina, let's commit to a future where every family has the support they need before, during, and after disaster strikes.
Congressman Troy Carter, Democrat of Louisiana, posting that video today, and more from the Associated Press article on this 20th anniversary. A Category 3 hurricane, when it made landfall in Louisiana on August 29, 2005, Katrina inflicted staggering destruction. The storm killed nearly 1,400 people across the state and racked up an estimated $200 billion in damage, flattening homes on the coast and sending ruinous flooding into low-lying neighborhoods. 2 decades later, it remains the costliest U.S. hurricane on record, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The failure of New Orleans' federal levee system inundated about 80% of New Orleans in floodwaters that took weeks to drain. Thousands of people clung to rooftops to survive or waited for evacuation in the sweltering, under-provisioned Superdome football stadium. That was from AP. Senator John Kennedy, Republican of Louisiana, posted this video.
It seems like yesterday. It's very hard to believe that it's been 20 years since Hurricane Katrina made landfall in Louisiana. I do. I remember it like it was yesterday. For many Louisiana families, Today marks 20 years since their worlds were turned upside down. Upside down. More than 1,800 lives lost, 200,000 homes destroyed, and $108 million in damage. It was devastating. I was serving as treasurer of Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina. I remember fielding calls from credit rating agencies and other financial institutions that wanted to write Louisiana off. They thought we were finished, done. They didn't know Louisianians. They doubted our ability to come back from Katrina's destruction. But they didn't know Louisiana like I do. And they didn't know the people of Louisiana like I do. They didn't understand the grit and the resilience of Louisiana's families. They didn't realize that hard times only make us stronger. They didn't believe we could come back swinging and rebuild from this storm, and it was a mighty storm. And the major storms that have followed in the 20 years since that fateful day. It wasn't easy. It was far from easy. But Louisianians pulled through the destruction. We didn't let it break us. We might have been bowed a few times, but we never broke. On this 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, I am proud to be a Louisianian. To the families who are facing their 20th year of missing a loved one that they lost in the storm, Becky and I are praying for you. All of Louisiana is sending its love.
Senator John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, putting up that video today. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry, a Republican, has proclaimed today Hurricane Katrina Remembrance Day, ordering Louisiana and U.S. flags flown at half-staff and encouraging residents to take part in a day of prayer. Mississippi leaders held a ceremony in Gulfport to reflect on the devastation that Hurricane Katrina caused to that state 20 years ago today. The governor of Mississippi at the time, Republican Haley Barbour, said, "I will never forget the helicopter ride when we took off from the airport here in Gulfport. It looked like the hand of God had wiped away the coast, utter obliteration." Haley Barbour also spoke about the process of recovery.
The legislature attitude was, we're in this together. We're not no Republicans and Democrats. We who are in North Mississippi care as much about the coast and understand the necessity of us helping rebuild. And I thank, bless his soul, Billy McCoy, who put the legislation on the floor that made it, that passed, that allowed casinos to come on shore, which I thought and so many people thought was indispensable to the recovery. And the legislature did it. Some of them, like Billy McCoy, were against gaming. Their constituents were against gaming. And having the coast come back was more important than either one of those things. I think of these things, and it reminds me of something that happened, and I wanted to try to see if I can get to the right page in my book. Let me close by saying this. On the first day of the special session in 2005, I made a speech, and I closed by saying, in 30 years, when I'm dead and gone, people will look at what the coast and South Mississippi have become. If it is simply a newer version of today, we will have failed. We will have failed those people, our children, and our grandchildren. If, on the other hand, it has become what it can be, bigger and better than ever, then those people in 30 years will say, The folks after Katrina, they got it right, and we're grateful to them forever. I am delighted to be able to be here to celebrate what's happened in the last 20 years on the coast and all over South Mississippi. God is great.
Haley Barbour, former Mississippi governor when Hurricane Katrina hit 20 years ago today, speaking at a ceremony today in Gulfport. The Atlantic hurricane season runs from June 1st through November 30th, and NOAA predicted earlier this year there would be 6 to 10 hurricanes this year, of which 3 to 5 would be major hurricanes. Recently, Hurricane Erin reached Category 5 strength but did not make landfall. Story from Politico. President Donald Trump threw a grenade Friday into September government funding negotiations on Capitol Hill, declaring the unilateral power to cancel billions of dollars in foreign aid by using a so-called pocket rescission. Escalating the administration's assault on Congress's funding prerogatives, the White House Budget Office announced Friday morning that Trump had canceled $4.9 billion through the gambit that Congress's top watchdog and many lawmakers argue is an illegal end run around their power of the purse. That's reporting from Politico. Secretary of State Marco Rubio writing on X, since assuming office, President Trump has been committed to rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse from the U.S. government, saving American workers billions of dollars. Now, for the first time in 50 years, the president is using his authority under the Impoundment Control Act to deploy a pocket rescission, canceling $5 billion in foreign aid and international organization funding that violates the president's America First priorities. Among items being canceled are $2.7 million for inclusive democracy programs in South Africa, $4 million for global LGBTQI plus awareness, and for the Global Labor Program. None of these programs are in America's interest, which is why the president is taking decisive action to put America and Americans first. That post from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, ranking member on the Budget Committee, put out a statement. Trump just made it clear that he is going to use an illegal and unconstitutional tactic known as a pocket rescission to claw back bipartisan congressionally appropriated funding. Republicans should be appalled that the long-standing bipartisan work of Congress is once again going to be trampled on by an administration that thinks it can do whatever it wants. Checks and balances be damned. That statement from Senator Jeff Merkley. The senator put out a video about a week ago anticipating this move.
What the hell is a pocket rescission? Senator Jeff Merkley here. I thought I'd try to give an explanation. The Trump administration wants to repeal funds that were allocated in a bipartisan way, and they want to do it in a fashion that is, quite frankly, unconstitutional. Why do I say unconstitutional? Because the Constitution gives the power of the purse to Congress, and then the president is supposed to execute that. The head of OMB, his name is Russell Vogt, says, no, I don't like that. I want to have a strongman presidency where the president decides what's spent. He says, well, here's what I'll do. I will pretend through most of the budget year that I'm going to spend the funds, and then at the very end of the budget year, I will submit a request to repeal funding. It's called a rescission. And under existing law, I have some 45 days in which I can pause the funding to get an answer from Congress. But oops, it was at the end of the budget year, calendar ran out, so now he's effectively canceled funding without going through a formal process, and that's what a pocket rescission is. It's not the normal way of doing things. It's not acceptable. In fact, every year members of Congress from both parties get together and make compromises to budget public funds in a way that will best support the needs of the American people. We don't always agree, but all of our constituents have a voice. No matter how they do it or what they call it, unilaterally withholding or canceling funding approved by Congress is illegal, and it will devastate hardworking families.
Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon about a week ago posting that video And today, President Donald Trump said he is going to cancel $4.9 billion in foreign aid through a pocket rescission. Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, putting out a statement that reads in part, given that this package was sent to Congress very close to the end of the fiscal year when the funds are scheduled to expire, this is an apparent attempt to rescind appropriated funds without congressional approval, which is unlawful and not permitted by the Impoundment Control Act. And the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said the pocket rescission announcement made it clear that President Trump and congressional Republicans are hell-bent on rejecting bipartisanship ahead of the government funding deadline, which is September 30th. Story from CNBC, the Department of Transportation on Friday canceled $679 million in federal funding for a dozen infrastructure projects that would support offshore wind power in the U.S., the latest attack in President Donald Trump's campaign to halt the development of renewable energy in the U.S. Many of the projects affected by the funding cancellation are staging areas that would be used to build offshore wind turbines. The single biggest pledge that was canceled is Humboldt Bay Offshore Wind in Northern California, with about $427 million in federal support withdrawn. The story from CNBC. Two of the other projects being canceled are off the shores of Rhode Island and Maryland. And Interior Secretary Doug Burgum was on Fox Business Channel on Wednesday talking about his department's canceling of those permits.
It looks like you've killed the Rhode Island farm, and it seems like you're pulling the plug on a wind project offshore Maryland. Why are you killing the wind industry?
Well, Stuart, this is part of our drive to make sure that we've got affordable, reliable energy for every American. And of course, as you know, you understand this industry. I mean, the offshore wind industry was really built around incredible, enormous tax subsidies. 60 to 70% of the project value on some of these projects was the tax breaks that were transferable to other companies. It wasn't really about electrical generation. It was under the guise of hey, this is really environmentally sound. But one of the things, of course, that as we go through under President Trump's executive order, reviewing every offshore wind project, finding that now there was Biden-era reports where the scientists at the National Oceanographic Administration, these folks were saying, hey, these are sensitive marine areas. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing the whale death. This is why we're concerned about the marine fisheries. Now we've got the Department of Defense involved with concerns about the effects on radar for our airports and for military uses, and also the effects underneath for undersea drones. So the DOD is taking a hard look, and then also, the Department of Transportation has got some concerns from the FAA standpoint, from the aerial radar. So there's a whole of government look at these massive tax subsidies. At the end of the day, citizens have to pay for them twice, because you're paying for the tax subsidy. You don't realize that with the hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidy, but then you're also paying for it because these are the highest electric prices in the country coming off of these projects.
Doug Burgum, Interior Secretary and Energy Czar, on the Fox Business Channel on Wednesday. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, spoke at a news conference in his state on Monday after the Revolution Wind project was halted. The federal government at the time saying it needed to review the project and address national security concerns.
Some of us have been working since the early days of Deepwater Wind, when Grover Fugate and Jen McCann were first figuring out how you could site offshore wind in America. And when Rhode Island solved that problem, a whole industry developed with wonderful paying jobs. And now one person in the White House running a political errand for the fossil fuel industry is trying to knock that down. He can try, but he will not succeed. Woo! This is a blow to Rhode Island. It is a deliberate blow, but it's also collateral damage. We're just in the way of this president wanting to serve his fossil fuel donors, who gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, so that they, an industry in distress, a polluting industry, a high-cost industry, can eke out a few more years against their cleaner, less expensive, clean energy competition. There used to be a day when Republicans said, government should not go into the marketplace and pick winners and losers. But when their fossil fuel donors want to use government's boot to stamp down a rival that is exceeding fossil fuel, that is displacing fossil fuel, that is cheaper and better and cleaner than fossil fuel, they go right to government. And Trump, with his pockets full of fossil fuel money, is only too happy to oblige. We will find out, I suspect, what the cost is. When he pulled this stunt in New York, the cost was that the governor had to clear a couple of pipelines. For who? Oh, right, for the fossil fuel industry, of course. And then empire went forward. So we are in, I think, the opening stages of what in my law enforcement days I would have referred to as extortion. And as a student of history, I will certainly refer to as what the founding fathers would have called corruption.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, at a news conference in Rhode Island on Monday. And today, the Transportation Department cut funding for the wind projects in Rhode Island, also Maryland, and 10 others, total $679 million. This is Washington Today. From the Financial Times, Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller has said he could back a jumbo rate cut at the U.S. Central Bank's next policy vote should August jobs data signal a substantial weakening in the world's largest economy. The Fed is widely expected to cut borrowing costs by 0.25 percentage points at its next interest rate vote, set for September 17th, following signs that the U.S. labor market is weakening and signals from senior rate setters, including Chair Jay Powell, that any hit to inflation from tariffs will prove a one-off shock and not a persistent problem. That's reporting from the Financial Times. Christopher Waller was at the Economic Club of Miami Thursday night.
Based on what I know today, I would support a 25 basis point cut at the committee's meeting on September 16th and 17th. While there are signs of a weakening labor market, I worry that conditions could deteriorate further and quite rapidly. And I think it is important that the FOMC not wait until such a deterioration is underway and risk falling behind the curve in setting appropriate monetary policy. My eagerness to move now is supported by my view that monetary policy is modestly restrictive. In June, the median of FOMC participants estimated that the longer run value of the federal funds rate, akin to what it would be without restricting or stimulating the economy, is 3%. With the target for the federal funds rate in the range of 4.25% to 4.5% now, that means we are 1.25% to 1.5 percentage points above neutral. So we have a ways to go. While I judge that the FOMC should have begun this process in July based on the data in hand, I don't believe that a cut of larger than 25 basis points is needed in September. Now that view, of course, could change if the employment report for August, due out a week from tomorrow, points to a substantially weakening economy and inflation remains well contained. I think there is a growing consensus that monetary policy needs to be more accommodative, and even some recognition that it would have been wise to begin the process in July. I don't believe the policy has fallen substantially behind the curve, but one way to signal that I don't intend to allow that to happen is to talk about where we go after September. Like other participants, I will be updating my economic projections just before the next FOMC meeting, including my assessment of the appropriate level of the federal funds rate at the end of this year and next. The totality of the data and the outlook will determine how quickly I believe we need to move policy to a neutral setting. But as I stand here today, I anticipate additional cuts over the next 3 to 6 months. And the pace of rate cuts will be driven by the incoming data.
Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller speaking at the Economic Club of Miami on Thursday. Story from CNBC, inflation edged higher in July, according to the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure, indicating that President Donald Trump's tariffs are working their way through the U.S. economy. The Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index showed that core inflation, which includes food and energy costs, ran at a 2.9% seasonally adjusted annual rate, according to a Commerce Department report on Friday. And a story from the New York Times, a federal judge considering a wrongful termination suit from a member of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors ended the first hearing without delivering a ruling on whether the Fed official Lisa Cook can stay in her job during the legal battle. The case challenging President Trump's decision to fire her holds major implications for the future of the central bank and its independence. Reporting from the New York Times. Wall Street today, the Dow down 92, NASDAQ down 249, S&P down 41. New York Times article begins, for many years, American shoppers have been able to buy inexpensive foreign items without paying tariffs and completing complicated customs paperwork. No more. Joining us now is Peter Eavis, business reporter for The Times, who wrote that article. Thanks so much for joining us. This repeal of the de minimis exception, what does it mean for the average American consumer buying something shipped from another country?
It means that almost certainly you will be paying a little more, and that could be to cover the tariffs and the extra costs of having the shipper, fill out the paperwork in some way or other.
You write that it's already roiled supply chains. What's been happening?
Foreign post offices are suspended shipping to the United States because of this change. And the reason they're doing that is that they now have to collect the tariffs, and they are not set up to do that.
How many packages are we talking about a year?
We're talking about 1.36 billion packages, and that's just under 4 million a day.
And how much tariff revenue does the Trump administration expect to raise off of this?
Well, yesterday they said that they had raised just nearly $500 million from packages that were previously exempt coming out of China. And let's not forget that the exemption was taken away from Chinese goods back in May. So they've effectively had, May, June, July, and a lot of August to collect tariffs on those packages. And they said that amounted to roughly $500 million.
Some have referred to this exception for packages valued under $800 as a loophole. Why was it known as that, and why did the Trump administration close it?
It was a loophole because if you bring goods in from overseas, you normally have to pay tariffs on them. But there's always been some sort of exemption. Well, at least for 100 years, there's always been some exemption that said that if those goods were worth less than a certain amount, you did not have to pay tariffs. And the reason for that was that it actually cost customs more to administer those tariffs than they were actually going to collect in tariffs, and so they let it go. But the amount, the amount at which you would have to start paying tariffs got higher and higher and higher over the years, and that's how it arrived at $800. And people felt that, opponents of the exemption felt that it was being abused to bring in goods that should have been paying tariffs, and were able to not do so because they were using the exemption.
Is enforcement going to be an issue here with so many packages, and who's doing the valuation?
It is going to be an issue because once you have a new system, a new tax, a new tariff, then somebody has to make sure that it's being collected. Now, Customs and Border Protection, the U.S. agency, is hoping that the foreign post offices assess what tariffs have to be paid and then make sure the collection has happened, and then they send the money to the U.S. It works a lot differently with the express carriers like UPS and FedEx. They have been in the business of collecting tariffs on goods for many years, and so they will do that for these parcels that were previously exempt. Now, it will cost people using, the express carriers a lot more than using the mail, but it can be done, and it can, but it does come at a cost.
The tariffs that affect other goods that are imported into the United States, there's been a lot of discussion with the Trump administration over whether there should be a line item. In this case, is it going to be obvious to the consumer, yes, I'm paying a tariff, a tax on what I am buying?
Not always, and you may not see it at all. You might just see sometimes the seller will eat the tariff or some of the tariff. Sometimes they'll put up the cost of the item in order to be able to, collect the money in order to pay the tariff. So the consumer, the buyer, is effectively paying the tariff in that situation, right? You may not see it at the time of checkout. It depends what you're buying and through what platform. But if you are going to use an express shipper, it will add significant costs because they are now collecting tariffs on parcels that did not previously have tariffs. And so I think you will see that extra cost at the time of checking out in the form of a higher shipping cost, at least for a time. But yeah, I mean, it's not clear. It depends where you buy and what you're buying. And but overall, expect prices to be higher for the goods that you were buying before this exemption went away.
Peter Eavis, a business reporter for the New York Times. Find his article at nytimes.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott begins an ABC News article said on Friday that he has signed the bill redrawing Texas's congressional map into law, a milestone for the Republican-driven mid-decade redistricting in the Lone Star State that comes as other states also prepare to consider redrawing their congressional map. Again, that was from ABC News. Governor Abbott, a Republican, shared this video.
This is Governor Greg Abbott. I'm about to sign the law that creates the one big, beautiful map that ensures fairer representation in the United States Congress for Texans. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Patrick, Speaker Burrows, Senator King, Representative Todd Hunter, Representative Cody Vasut, and all of the legislature who stayed in the Capitol and got this law to my desk. Texas is now more red in the United States Congress.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott posting that video. The next Texas map has been drawn to give Republicans an electoral advantage in 5 U.S. House seats currently held by Democrats in the state. California has passed its own new congressional redistricting map to give Democrats an advantage in 5 U.S. House seats currently held by Republicans in California, although the California plan must be approved by a voter referendum in November in order to take effect. California Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, quote, tweeted Governor Abbott's video, writing, "Congratulations on your new position as Trump's #1 lapdog. I know you worked hard for it." Story from the Washington Post. Senator Joni Ernst, Republican from Iowa, will not seek re-election to a third term, according to 2 people familiar with her decision, creating an opening for Democrats in their bid to regain control of the Senate. Iowa, once a swing state, remains an uphill battle for Democrats. President Donald Trump won the state in November by more than 13 percentage points, and the last time a Democrat won a Senate race in Iowa was in 2008. That was from the Washington Post. And speaking of California, this from Fox News, a spokesperson for Kamala Harris confirmed to Fox News on Friday that the former vice president's Secret Service protection has been revoked by President Donald Trump. The spokesperson added that there was no reason given as to why it was removed. Former President Joe Biden signed an executive memorandum before leaving office, which extended Harris's protection for an additional year after the normal 6 months that former vice presidents received in the past. That was from Fox News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea. It's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Another New York Times article, Europe has begun buying American weapons for Ukraine in earnest, only weeks after President Trump struck a deal with NATO allies to do so. The latest sale announced by the State Department on Thursday will send 3,500 extended-range cruise missiles and GPS navigation kits to Ukraine once Congress formally approves it, as expected. They cost $825 million, paid for by Denmark, the Netherlands, and Norway, with some unspecified financial assistance from the Pentagon. That was from the New York Times. There was a United Nations Security Council meeting today on the war in Ukraine after more deadly overnight strikes by Russia on Ukrainian cities, including the capital, Kyiv. Speaking at the meeting, the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Yulia Severendenko.
President Zelensky spoke with the Secretary General yesterday to discuss the necessary steps to stop the killings. At the same time, alongside words of support, we value concrete action that both strengthen our defense capabilities and save human lives. Ukraine urgently requires additional air defense systems to protect our people, to protect our territory, as well as long-range strike capabilities to neutralize Russian military facility from which attacks are launched. Distinguished members, let me be clear. These killings are deliberate acts of terror. It's an informed decision taken by Moscow to continue its systematic campaign to terrorize civilians and extinguish any semblance of normal life. Yesterday, Russia again responded brutally to our attempts to engage them in a civilized dialogue, in the language of international law, peace, and respect for human life. Russia continues to choose killing over ending the war. We should take this into account in our efforts aimed at peaceful resolution and establishment of reliable security guarantees. These guarantees shall protect both Ukrainian sovereignty and the lives of Ukrainian people, especially children. Our people must feel safe already today. That's why ceasefire remains an essential prerequisite for successful future negotiation.
Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Severendenko speaking to the United Nations Security Council today in New York City. The Russian Deputy Ambassador to the UN, Dmitry Polyansky, also spoke at the meeting.
The Kiev regime, as in the past, shamelessly and criminally used the tactic of a human shield by putting these enterprises of the defense complex, air defenses and electronic warfare, near residential developments and densely populated areas of cities. And so it's no surprise that once again, Ukrainian air defense missiles hit residential districts. And that was the reason for damage being caused to the buildings of the UK and EU missions, and also the death of civilians in partially destroyed residential buildings. However, these victims were not only not forcing the criminal regime to, at long last, remove air defenses from military enterprises from residential districts, but are actually being used by them as a tool for political manipulation. Every such tragedy is intentionally whipped up to blame the deaths of Ukrainian civilians on Russia, to appeal to Western sponsors and international donors, to demand the introduction of new sanctions, and to angle for new arms deliveries. And that happened today as well. Before our eyes, with the complicity of Western members of the Security Council, the lives of the civilians of Ukraine have been turned into a bargaining chip, and human suffering is becoming a way to achieve mercenary foreign policy goals.
Through an interpreter, Dmitry Polyansky, Russian Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, at today's UN Security Council meeting in New York City. Story from AFP. The leaders of France and Germany on Friday vowed to step up pressure on Russia over its war against Ukraine, warning that President Vladimir Putin was showing little appetite to end Moscow's 3.5-year onslaught against its neighbor. French President Emmanuel Macron said that Putin would have played United States President Donald Trump if the Russian leader failed to fulfill a pledge to meet Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz added it looked like Putin was unwilling to hold such a meeting and said that the war looked like it would last many more months. That was from the article from AFP. In Washington, outside the White House, a question about this to President Trump's Homeland Security Advisor, Stephen Miller.
The French president has said today that if Putin doesn't have talks with Zelensky, then President Trump will have been, quote, played. Is that true? Is President Trump being played by President Putin at the moment?
Such an absurd question. President Trump has achieved 7 peace deals in 7 months. No president in history has done more to advance the cause of peace. He's been nominated by multiple world leaders for the Nobel Peace Prize. Literally no president, not just in our lifetimes, but that I can think of in American history, and no world leader anywhere today, anywhere on earth, has done more to advance world peace than President Trump. He's ended the conflict between Israel and Iran. He's ended the conflict between Rwanda and Congo, between India and Pakistan, Azerbaijan. I mean, example after example after example. And obviously he's working steadfastly to end the killing in Ukraine. And keep in mind, this is President Biden's war. It started because of President Biden, and President Trump inherited President Biden's war, and he's working steadfastly to end the killing. And that's something that everyone in the world should celebrate. Yes.
Stephen Miller, Deputy White House Chief of Staff and Homeland Security Advisor, speaking to reporters outside the White House. U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Tommy Pigott writing on X, today the Trump administration is announcing it will deny and revoke visas from members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, and the Palestinian Authority, PA, ahead of the upcoming United Nations General Assembly per U.S. law. Before we take them seriously as partners in peace, the PA and PLO must completely reject terrorism and stop counterproductively pursuing the unilateral recognition of a hypothetical state. That was the post from the State Department deputy spokesperson. The Palestinian Observer State Ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, was asked for his reaction at a news conference today at the UN.
The United States has just said that they'll be denying and revoking visas from members of the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. They said it doesn't apply to the UN mission, but have they indicated to you how this might affect President Abbas's planned trip to New York?
This statement attributed to the State Department was just released. It was brought to my attention just about half an hour ago. We will see exactly what it means and how it applies to any of our delegation, and we will respond accordingly.
Palestinian Ambassador Riyad Mansour at a UN news conference. He was there to talk about the war in Gaza. CBS News writes that Israel's military said Friday that it had launched the initial stages of a planned offensive to seize Gaza City, declaring the Palestinian territory's biggest population center a dangerous combat zone. The Israeli Defense Forces said it was suspending daily humanitarian pauses in the fighting in Gaza City, which have allowed food and other aid materials to be brought in during the daylight hours. That was from CBS News. Ambassador Mansour called his news conference to discuss what he says is the support of 14 United Nations Security Council members to call for a ceasefire in the war in Gaza and allow journalists into Gaza to cover what is happening, reverse illegal Israeli settlement plans, resume a two-state solution conference in September. He was asked by a reporter about the one Security Council member not supporting it, the U.S., which has veto power.
Why aren't you going directly to the General Assembly? Because you and everyone here knows that the United States will not accept a resolution as you outlined.
You know, we are not going to let the Security Council to get away from shouldering their responsibility. They are, according to the Charter, responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. Even if I know that we have 14 votes in favor and one is still not convinced, we have to keep trying with the Security Council. And I think that the Security Council, if you look at the body of members of the Security Council as we debate, I believe that they are so ashamed of the fact that the Security Council was paralyzed. And again, my colleague, the ambassador of Sierra Leone, said that it was a shameful situation when the Security Council was paralyzed at that time and was unable to do anything to prevent the massacre of the genocide in Rwanda from taking place. So that to maximize the pressure, we do not abandon the hope that eventually we will succeed to have the Security Council to act collectively because it is their duty. We are very patient. We will not abandon that right that we have to keep knocking on the door of the Security Council and to keep demanding that the Council to act.
Palestinian ambassador to the UN, Riyad Mansour, at a news conference at the UN in New York City. Story from BBC News. The body of Israeli hostage Ilan Weiss has been recovered in an operation in the Gaza Strip, Israel's military has announced. Weiss 56 years old, was killed during Hamas's attack in southern Israel on October 7, 2023. The remains of a second hostage, whose identity has not been released yet, were also recovered, the Israeli Defense Forces said. After the latest announcement, 48 hostages remain in Gaza, 20 of whom Israel believes are still alive. That was from BBC News. The ambassadors to the United Nations from Great Britain, Germany, and France also met with reporters today at the UN in New York City. They discussed the letter they sent this week to the Security Council to begin the process of reimposing sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program. The three accuse Iran of violating the 2015 deal that aimed to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon in return for the lifting of international sanctions. British Ambassador Barbara Woodward spoke for the group known as the E3 about the so-called snapback sanctions.
According to the IAEA, Iran is the only country without nuclear weapons producing high-enriched uranium. Iran has stopped providing IAEA access agreed under the JCPOA. Moreover, it has recently significantly reduced the access to nuclear material and sites it is obliged to provide under the NPT. Despite this, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom are making every effort to resolve this diplomatically. Most recently, we offered Iran an extension to snapback should Iran take specific steps to address our most immediate concerns. Our asks were fair and realistic. Iran's resumption of negotiations on a comprehensive agreement, Iran's compliance with its IAEA obligations, and steps to address our concerns regarding the high-enriched uranium stockpile. However, as of today, Iran has shown no indication that it is serious about meeting them. It is not implementing its obligations to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency. It has not re-engaged in negotiations with the United States with a view to reaching an acceptable diplomatic resolution. Our notification to the Security Council has now triggered a 30-day period. It does not mark the end of diplomacy. Our extension offer remains on the table. We hope Iran will take the necessary steps to address the international community's serious concerns over its nuclear program. We urge Iran to reconsider this position, to reach an agreement based on our offer, and to help create the space for a diplomatic solution to this issue for the long term. Otherwise, targeted UN sanctions focused on tackling Iranian nuclear proliferation return at the end of this 30-day period.
British Ambassador to the United Nations Barbara Woodward standing with the ambassadors from Germany and France at the UN in New York City. Reuters writing that Iran's UN ambassador Amir Saeed Iravani said the E3 offer was full of unrealistic preconditions. He said they are demanding conditions that should be the outcome of negotiations, not the starting point, and they know these demands cannot be met. He said the E3 should instead back a short, unconditional technical extension of Resolution 2231, which enshrines a 2015 nuclear deal that lifted UN and Western sanctions on Iran in return for curbs on its nuclear program, reporting from Reuters. And finally, on Washington today, this from Roll Call, former U.S. Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham, Republican of California, an ace naval aviator who resigned from Congress in disgrace after pleading guilty to corruption charges, died Wednesday at age 83. The San Diego Union-Tribune reported that Cunningham died at a hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas, following an illness. He pleaded guilty in 2005, admitting to accepting at least $2.4 million in bribes. That included about $1 million in cash, as well as rugs, antiques, furniture, yacht club fees, boat repairs, moving costs, and vacation expenses in exchange for using his appropriations role to obtain earmarks on behalf of defense contractors. Article from Roll Call. This is Randy Duke Cunningham in 2005 outside U.S. District Court in San Diego, pleading guilty to bribery and tax evasion.
I'm resigning from the House of Representatives because I've compromised the trust of my constituents. When I announced several months ago that I would not seek re-election, I publicly declared my innocence because I was not strong enough to face the truth, so I misled my family, friends, staff, colleagues, the public, and even myself. For all of this, I am deeply sorry. The truth is I broke the law, concealed my conduct, and disgraced my office. I know that I will forfeit my freedom, my reputation, my worldly possessions, most importantly, the trust of my friends and family. Some time ago, I asked lawyers to inform U.S. Attorney Carol Lam that I would plead guilty and begin serving a prison term. Today is a culmination of that process. I will continue to cooperate with the government's ongoing investigation to the best of my ability. In my life, I have had great joy and great sorrow, and now I know great shame. I learned in Vietnam that the true measure of a man is how he responds to adversity. I can't undo what I've done, but I can atone. And now, I'm almost 65 years old, and I enter the twilight of my life. I intend to use the remaining time that God grants me to make amends, and I will. The first step in that journey is to admit fault and apologize, and I do apologize. The next step is to face the consequences of my action like a man. Today I have taken the first step, and with God's grace, I will take the second. God bless you.
Why did you do it, Congressman? Why did you do it?
Why did you do it?
Former Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham, Republican from California, in 2005 outside the courthouse in San Diego, ending a 15-year congressional career and heading to prison. Duke Cunningham has died at the age of 83. He was sentenced to 8 years and 4 months, ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution. He was released in 2013 and granted a pardon by President Donald Trump in 2021. And this from the Newsweek article on his death. Born in 1941, Cunningham was a decorated fighter pilot in the Vietnam War and is often credited as the inspiration for the Tom Cruise character Maverick in the movie Top Gun. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and holiday weekend. There'll be no Washington Today on Labor Day. We'll be back on Tuesday.